and building stars, because as Lillian Burns said, if you had a flop, they had two other films on the shelf.
Sure.
So you never had a flop.
And then you had people who looked like people when someone wouldn't show up. Like Kim Novak or whatever it was, I forget, they would have a girl who looked like her to slip her in if she didn't behave, you know. It was a game.
Right. Well, we were looking at the Andy Hardy movie where Judy and Mickey are in it, and it's Lana's first movie. And it's amazing. They've got Judy Garland, just as you say. She looks like some kind of overgrown child. And here's Lana in the bathing suit. They're the same age.
Yeah.
And so you really believe that that's because they just said, look, Judy and Mickey have to like stay in this child's mode because that's where our money is?
They never liked the unknown. They still don't like the unknown. The great story of Katharine Hepburn with this young punk casting director. And he wants to know if she fits the part that she is supposedly up for. And he says, what have you done, Miss Hepburn, lately? And she looks at him and says, young man, what have you done ever? So it's, you know, it's a crapshoot. The game, you look at the ones that make it, and there's so much luck connected with it. And again, the shows you turn down. You go through the ones you make a value judgment. It's a terrible mistake. Somebody takes that same part and wins the Academy Award. You want to go home and kill yourself, you know?
But once in the studio system, once you were in. Van Johnson said, they did our taxes, they fixed our teeth. I mean, you almost had the feeling that once you were out of there, what did you do then? I mean, it must have been horrible for people in the 50s.
Well, Van was a creature, and he's one of my dear, dear friends. He's a wonderful man. And he was a creature of the studio system, and he's right, at his best. And he was damn good. And they took care of him. Then they sort of, like the Potter Familia, if you're a good boy, you come over here, sit on my lap, you know. That's at its best. By the same token, don't tee them up, because, boy, they'll stick you in that corner in a suspension. They cost, without getting into the specifics, the studio cost me the Academy Award, because well, it doesn't matter. The point is that the structure of the studios then was such that they could pretty much, they don't do that now. There are no more major studios, but then they pretty much ran the show. And behavior, as you say, I won't name the actor, but misbehaved and was caught in flagranti with somebody, and the guy didn't work anywhere for about 8 months, because every studio head called every other studio head, and he had to wind up playing guitar in a bar in Mexico someplace. So I don't want to get into the specifics of who it was, because that wouldn't be fair, but I mean, it was a control whereby, but again, as Van says, they did take care of you. Fix your teeth, taught you how to ride, taught you how to fence, taught you how to dance, taught you how to be a movie star, you know. And they took Bernie Schwartz, a fellow called Tony Curtis. Yonder lies the castle of me, Fada de Caliph. And Tony's a dear friend of mine, and he had that urge to be, and they took that urge and they used it, and they made him into a darn good actor, you know.
So do you agree with Janet that today when people talk about Hollywood, it's that Hollywood that they think of it? In other words, do you think that people today coming up have lost a lot in not having that kind of a studio?
They lost a lot of fun. On the set, there's not a great deal of difference. There's a symbiotic relationship between the performer and the director, and that, when at its best, is a love feast. That's wonderful. It's the interaction back and forth with a fine director. But the fun of it then, there were kicks to being an actor. There were kicks to being, and there were parties, and Hollywood was a way of life then. But now it's disparate. It's in all different directions, international and corporate. And it's a little bit different too now, since the actors have joined the people in charge and are owners of their own careers and everything else, where they have the back end of a movie. They get $20 million up front. They are now the producers. They are now taking the place of the studio heads. So they're a combination of the two. In the old days, we were hired help. We had nothing to do with that. In fact, Jimmy Stewart was the first one. Lou Wasserman, I think, was the first one that gave Jimmy Stewart a piece of the action of, I think, Winchester 73, I guess it went. So it's a business now. Then it was a kind of a belonging game at its best. And like Carole Lombard said, like a club. Hey, man, it's nice to be invited to the party.
And also because you couldn't shoot sound off the lot in the 40s and in the 50s, you would get up in the morning, have breakfast, and go to work. You just drive down the road and go to work, right? I mean, you didn't go on location, or very rarely.
Not too much, no. You're right.
I mean, Janet was saying on her first picture, Romance of Rosie Ridge, which is, I guess, in 48, that they came back and post-dubbed because they built the location, but they couldn't shoot. They didn't have the sound capability.
Then they came up with a thing to try to fight television. They had stereophonic sound, so they were selling the sound to the theaters, making them redo. I can't think of the exact name of what the sound they have, but anyway, it was sound that was supposed to be so great in the theaters it could never be replicated in your house on a television screen. Well, what happened then, the sound had to be absolutely perfect, meaning perfect to the point whereby in many cases it lost its, its sort of
presence.
Ease. Yeah. And I remember doing a thing called Gift of Love for 20th Century Fox with Bacall, Lauren Bacall, and I had to break down and cry at the grave, and it was not an easy scene, and they shot it fairly near the freeway. And this is a kind of an interesting story in a way. So I did the scene, and the tears came, and oh, that was great, Bobby. Okay, fine. Except stereophonic sound, and we can hear the cars going by. I said, what? I said, yeah, okay, we're going to loop it. I said, you're going to loop me crying with the sobs? I got to cry. It's the only way we can do it, because the studio wants the theaters to have perfect sound. So just before I do this, and the guy said, by the way, he said, between us, there's a line that goes right from here to the boss's office. I said, what? I was so mad. I said, any idiot that would make you have to dub a scene like this, it's impossible. I mean, come on, who would ever do a thing like this with going right up to Daryl Zanuck's office? But, and they would spy on you, and Harry Cohen had behind the entrance, there was a kind of an eagle clock thing in the entranceway, and that was dubbed, and he could hear people talking, usually about him, go right up to his office. It was, they had spies, and it was an interesting time, I must say.
But at least you had a footing with them, right? I mean, it's not like they intimidated everybody. I mean, you guys definitely had a footing. No. And, Lillian Burns said a very funny thing. She said, yes, in the beginning, they had to behave. But once they clicked into their power, then it was a whole other story.
You
like
mean the performers.
Yeah, because she was saying, yes, Joan Crawford may have had to do some unpleasant things, but once she had control, darling, then she had control. And I think that's true of all of them, right? Lana, I mean, she didn't take any orders beyond a certain point.
And you could feel, it was a continual game. It's like with kids with their parents. It's like a dog, like the puppy who chews up all your slippers. But it's a matter of who's going to win finally. Then payback time comes. Now, wait a minute, I'm a star. You need me, right? You become terribly important. In a sense, you're paying back for some of the humiliation you took when you began. So it was a kind of a standoff. Now it's not that at all. Now it's strictly money. It's strictly a piece of the action, back end, $20 million up front, and it's you just get out there with your agent and battle. I don't, because I'm unfortunately not in that category of today, but it was a time then where you again, literally you were kind of hired help on a grand level. And now it's a different story. Now the ownership is in many cases like Schwarzenegger getting $20 million a movie or whatever. But then again, you realize the money they're getting is not salary money, not like we got paid. I think they talked about Jack Nicholson making 50 some odd million dollars on Batman as a Joker. I'm not sure of that amount, but something like that. Well, he didn't get that as a salary. He got that as a piece of the success of the motion picture. So he's a businessman. By the same token, he was unlucky with his next one, Two Jakes, which didn't make negative costs. So now the question is, and he's probably our best actor, is he worth $55 million or is he worth nothing? And there is no there. Everyone tries to find finite answers to the infinite. It just doesn't work like that. It's a crazy business.
Well, the other thing too is that in the era of the 40s and the 50s, people, I think, were much more attached to the stars. They identified with them. Yeah. If you look at Lana Turner at a defense plant in the 40s, all of these women are in these overalls and stuff. She's perfect. Yeah. And I think that, I don't think you have people who are idolized in that way anymore.
No, I agree with that. I think that made it very special at that time. And there was, the idealization and the removal had a lot to do with each other. In other words, they were an extension of what the audience wanted to be. And the pictures were an extension of what the studio heads wanted America to be. An idealization, really. And kind of a never land, but it was great fun to work in those days.
But it must have been amazing to be a fly on the wall and see what the reality was. You know, I mean, you hear all those stories about how Louis Mayer used to cry.
Oh, sure.
He had this great crying thing.
Yes.
But, you know, I've never even seen that portrayed in a film, you know, about Hollywood, which would be so entertaining, you know, I think so entertaining.
I knew them all because I grew up in this town, and Louis B. Mayer would come by the house and stuff, and they were to me, they were just people long before I ever had any ambition of becoming an actor. It was a crazy household, but it was filled with lots of laughs and a lot of excitement. I remember when Rosa Ponsell, probably one of the greatest singers that ever lived. My family were musicians on my mother's side, and my uncle was first baritone at the Metropolitan anyway. But I can remember that Rosa Ponsell was there this particular evening, and L.B. was there, and she wanted very much to be a movie star. And she was probably the biggest star in opera, one of the greatest voices that ever lived. But they also had their strength, and he was there, and he was smoking a cigar. And he was saying, "I'd love to hear you sing, Miss Ponsell." Right. And she went over and took the cigar out of his mouth, put it out, and said, "Mr. Mayer, as much as I want to be at your studio, I cannot sing with cigar smoke." And she opened up her mouth, and his voice came out, and the wall shook, and he put her arms around her. But you see, it was a game. And she was strong enough to take his cigar and put it out when she wanted to be under contract to Metro.
Right. Cut. We should cut.